Hello and welcome everyone to the daily news analysis for 10th of September 2023 from the News Hindu पेपर। तो चलिए आज शुरू करते हैं। इंपॉर्टेंट आर्टिकल जितने सारे हैं। G20 clinches New Delhi declarations. On the opening day of the summit, G20 forges consensus on contentious Ukraine paragraph. The deal was secured following a proposal that was negotiated until past midnight on Friday. PM stops proceeding to make the announcement. The groupings accept membership of the African Union. In an unexpected early breakthrough and success for India's presidency, G20 members agreed to joint statement, forging consensus on the contentious Ukraine paragraph and also accepted the membership of the African Union into the groupings on Saturday. The final document marks a shift in the position taken by the US, the European Union and G7 countries and dilutes the harsh criticism of Russia contained in last year's Bali G20 statement. Diplomats and officials said that the final breakthrough followed a proposal by Indonesia, India, Brazil and South Africa, which the Hindu has seen that was negotiated until past midnight of Friday. And again on Saturday, the development was announced directly by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who stopped proceeding during the second session of the summit on day one. I have just got some good news right now, Mr. Modi said to the leaders gathered. Due to the hard work of our team and your support, we have achieved consensus on the Delhi G20 Leaders Summit Declaration. I propose we adopt these leaders. I propose we adopt this leaders declaration, he added, and then pronounced it adopted with a bang of his gavel a day before the summit actually ended. Asked at a press conference by the G20 presidency, both External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and India's G20 Sherpas said that the consensus had come about due to the stand taken by Indonesia, India, Brazil and South Africa consecutively hosts of the G20. Japan as current president of G7 plus EU bloc also played a role in bridging the differences, sources said. Eventually everybody helped, but the emerging market took a lead on this, and we have a strong history of working together, said Mr. Jaishankar, possibly referring to the earlier membership of all four countries in the non-aligned movement. Bear in mind that there are four developing countries who are president of G20 in succession, he added. Mr. Khan said the negotiations that followed were very tough and very ruthless, and the issue was clinched due to the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's determination for a joint statement. Generic reference as a result, while Bali document contained paragraphs condemning and deploring Russia's invasion on Ukraine in February 2022. The New Delhi Declaration simply referred to the differing national position of the various G20 members on the war in Ukraine, with a generic reference that all states must refrain from the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition against the territorial integrity and sovereignty or political independence of any state. When asked about the climb down by the European Union and G7 countries, officials said that the choice they faced was of agreeing to the text or having no text at all, which would have led to unfavorable comparisons to the recent BRICS summit in South Africa. Russia and China had agreed to a joint statement that included the reference to the national pro- national positions on Ukraine during the BRICS summit. Let's say you had no G20 statement. Newspaper headlines would say the G20 is finished, and they would be right. G20 could be replaced by blocks like BRICS and G7. So in a way, so by having a statement, we keep the platform and the organization alive, and that is the broader picture we must see, said a senior of European Union officials. The declaration of 83 paragraph, which included 8 paragraphs of the on the Ukraine war and its resultant economic impact, contained many agreements as a part of the finance task track, highlighting an agreed plan to strengthen multilateral development banks, a way forward for regulating cryptocurrencies and the use of digital public infrastructure for financial inclusion as measure gains along with a faster debt distress plan for vulnerable countries. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said the Indian G20 presidency had walked the talk on climate change. The declaration included a quantum jump in climate financing from billions of dollars to trillions of dollars, noting the need for US dollar 5.8 to 5.9 trillion in the pre-2030 period for developing countries as well as US $4 trillion per year for clean energy technology by 2030 to reach net zero by 2050. Earlier in the day, Mr. Modi also announced the G20 decision to include the 55 nation African Union, the second regional bloc, to join the G20 after European Union welcoming the African Union chairperson Azali Assoumani to the table of the leaders with an embrace. Prime Minister Modi said the inclusion of the African bloc would enhance the effectiveness of the G20. In an interview, the Hindu Mr. Assamani had said that Africa would help deal with the global challenges within the organization but needs investment and skill development assistance from other members. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa's spokesperson Vincent Magwenya told reporters in the International Media Center at the Bharat Mandapam venue that it was important that the voice of the Global South and the end of the African continent would no longer be excluded from World Forum. And next जो है West Bengal unveils education policy stresses on three language formula. The West Bengal government has come up with a state education policy 2023 recommending Bangla as a subject along with a three language formula for class V to V third I. The policy takes note The policy takes note of the federal spirit of the country's constitution and seeks to avoid over-centralization in education. The committee also recommends that Bangla as a subject may be introduced from class 1 to X for students of the other mediums of instructions. A suitable curriculum and syllabus may be formulated accordingly. One of the recommendations of the policy document states that the panel consulted various education policies, including reports on the National Education Policy 2020 and the recently published a report of the Task Force for National Education Policy Implementation in Maharashtra and the report on NEP by Kerala. The three language for formula for class V to V third I lays stress on the mother tongue of the student. It is suggested that the first language mother tongue would be the medium of the instruction of the school. Example, Nepali in Nepali medium school, Santali in Santali medium school, Rajbanshi in Rajbanshi medium school, Bengali in Bengali medium school. The policy document statement states West Bengal on May 31, 2023 had announced that it will accept NEP, particularly in colleges and universities run and aided by the state government. However, in school education, the government differed on various fronts, including the necessity of having a Class X board examination, Madhyamik examination. The three language policy is in tune with NEP. Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee also stressed on the three language formula and students learning Bangla school structure. The state's education policy has rejected changing the school structure to a 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 system from the existing model because it advocates abolishing the Class X board examination. The present structure of the school education in West Bengal follows a 5 plus 4 plus 2 plus 2 pattern. It is proposed that the same structure should continue to be followed in the state. The policy document states another key recommendation is to introduce the semesters system from class VIII in a phased manner over the next 3 years on higher education. The new policy recommends increasing gross enrollment ratio and sharing sharing of resources between universities and colleges, recommending earmarking 6% of the GDP for education. The policy document urges the center to help the state government allocate a relative share of state GDP for education since education is in the concurrent list of the constitution. The state's education policy is being envisaged for next 13 years. In Puthupalli, LDF pays a heavy price for silence. From the beginning, the Puthupalli by-election was a one-horse race, but it had nothing to do with the quality of candidate fielded by the two major fronts. A strong wave of sympathy for the departed Congress leader, woman Candy, who represented the constituency for over 5 decades, obviously worked to the advantage of his son, the United Democratic Front candidate Candy Oman, who won with a margin of over 37,000 votes. But what happened him post a massive win was the anti-incumbency factor that the ruling left Democratic Front chose to gloss over. Needed to introspect while CPIM Politburo member M.A. Baby admitted the need for introspection by his party and the left front. Many in the top echelon of the party in the state resorted to the strawman argument of the Bharatiya Janata Party, whose candidate fortified his deposit, having played a role in the UDF's landslide win. Mr. Babitu pointed to a coming together of anti-theft, anti-left votes, including those of BJP supporters. The fact is that the BJP has never been a force to reckon with. The constituency for the leadership of the left front, that of the CPIM, to be more precise, conveniently sidesteps is the fact that there's consternations among the people that the government is running on fumes and Also, that party has not been able to adequately and conveniently respond to the spat of allegations leveled against the close kin of Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan if Mr. Vijayan chose to take questions related to the case of gold smuggling through the diplomatic baggage ahead of the 2021 Assembly election. His refusal to respond to the charges angered the public, upset his party workers at the lower levels. बाकी रेस्ट जो है ये थोड़ा देख लीजिएगा. देन नेक्स्ट जो है reviving grain deal with cool global food inflation. The G20 leaders' recommendation to revive the Black Sea Grain Initiative to help the movement of grains, food and fertilizers from Russia and Ukraine to the rest of the world would help ease inflation in several countries but may not affect India's own inflation trajectory much, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said, but largely India's domestic inflation is impacted by the vagaries of monsoon and supply side issue, not so much as other countries that depend a lot more on grain imports for their consumption, she said. Speaking after the leaders adopted the New Delhi Declaration, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar noted that leaders recognized the significant implications for global economy arising from the ongoing war in Ukraine and the impact it has had, especially on developing and least developed nations that are still recovering from the pandemic and economic disruptions. The three F's, food, fuel, and fertilizers, were issues of special concern, he said. The next G20 leaders declaration notes need for more finance to arrest global warming. The G20 leaders' declaration for the first time formally recognizes the quantum jump in the finance necessary for the world to transition to a renewable energy economy. The declaration noted the need for $5.8 trillion to $5.9 trillion in the pre-2030 period required for developing countries as well as $4 trillion per year for clean energy technology by 2030 to reach net zero by 2050. The G20's promises to reach net zero or when there were no net carbon emissions into the atmosphere did not imply all nations had to equally contribute to the cost of doing so and would have to account for principles of common but differentiated responsibility, a long-standing dispute among developed and developing countries to prevent the globe from warming beyond runaway tipping points is on transferring money and technology to developing countries, though it was agreed in 2010 that $100 billion a year was to be collected by 2020 and transferred annually until 2025. Little has actually materialized. Saturday's declaration reiterates this commitment and notes that developed countries are likely to meet this goal for the first time in 2023. Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2021, while committing that India would achieve net zero by 2070, also underlined that trillions of dollars was needed to achieve this. The declaration recognizes the need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 43% by 2030 relative to 2019 levels and notes that global peaking must occur before 2025. The G20 communique also encourages tripling of renewable energy capacity by 2030 and voluntarily doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvement by 2030 2030, the tripling of renewable energy and access to low cost finance to the tune of 4 trillion annually is on facilitating and not committing to it. While the progress is good, a time commitment on both the renewable energy target and allocation to finance to energy and developing countries would have strengthened the commitment for from nations on the climate crisis, said Vibhuti Garg, Director, South Asia Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. The net zero target needs much higher investment, and if that is not announced, it will be difficult for developing countries to achieve their climate goals. The G20 nations on Saturday resolved to increase women's participation and leadership in climate change mitigation and adaptation and support gender-responsive solutions to build resilience to its impact. The declaration accepted the disproportionate impact of climate change on all women and girls and decided to accelerate climate action with gender equality at its core. To this end, we will support and increase women's participation, partnership, decision making, and leadership in climate change mitigation and adaptation and disaster risk reduction strategies and policy frameworks on environmental issues, support gender responsiveness and environment resilient solution, including water sanitation and hygiene was solution to build resilience to the impact of climate change and environmental degradation, the declaration said. It further agreed to establish a new working group on empowerment of women in order to promote gender equality, paving the way for coordinated global approach. This is on the finance track of G20 to push forward on crypto regulation MBD reforms, paving the way for a coordinated global approach to regulating cryptocurrencies, strengthening multilateral development banks lending capacity and replicating the use of digital public infrastructure like the India stack to expand financial inclusion around the world, where some of the 10 major outcomes achieved under the finance track of India's G20 presidency. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that the Indian presidency has crafted solutions that resonate with each member, offering a shared path forward for all and leaving no one behind. Many action-oriented outcomes of this presidency contain comprehensive strategies that cater to the unique needs and aspirations of all developing nations. She emphasized discussions on the regulations roadmap for cryptocurrencies and the bolstering of the multilateral development bank's capacity will continue in Morocco next month when the G20 finance ministers and central bank governor will meet in Marrakech for the autumn meetings of the International Monetary Fund (IMF) as well as the World Bank. Mr. Sitharaman identified laying the building blocks for a sorry, laying the building blocks for एक second. For global coordinated and comprehensive policy regulated framework for crypto assets has a significant outcomes. Clear policy The global push for a clear policy on crypto as assets has gained momentum under the Indian presidency, and a global consensus is emerging on the same, she said. The New Delhi declarations adopted by the G20 leaders noted that they continue to closely monitor the risk of the fast-paced development in the crypto assets ecosystem and endorsed the Financial Stability Board's recommendation for the regulation, supervision, and oversight of crypto assets activists and markets, and the end of global stablecoin arrangements meeting the demand. The G20 leaders also reached an agreement on the need for better, bigger, and more effective MDBs because the developmental demands from around the world are so high, and finance minister said, adding that this will enhance the representation and voice of the developing countries in these institution decision making. The endorsement of G20 roadmap for implementation of recommendation of an independent panel on the capital adequacy framework of the MDBs can help them use their existing resources effectively and potentially yield additional lending headrooms of approximately $200 billion over the next decade. So, India has harnessed the opportunity provided by the G20 presidency to effectively articulate and embedded the priorities of the global south in larger global conservation reforms, she underlined. Next, health of democracy vital for India-US ties, White House officials. According to White House officials, the health of democracy is an important issue for the India-US relationship. Senior White House officials said here on Saturday. They said US President Joe Biden has raised these issues at every meeting he had held with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, briefing the media after the bilateral meeting between the two leaders on Friday night. The officials made a reference to the Karnataka Assembly elections in May, saying that Mr. Modi's public congratulations to the Congress for its victory in the state against the ruling BJP was a positive indicator for democracy. They said India was disappointed that Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping did not attend the G20 summit, adding that there was clear appreciation that US President Joe Biden traveled to India for the event. There was a clear appreciation on the part of India that President Biden is here and that he made the trip, said Kurt Campbell, the National Security Council coordinator for Indo-Pacific. I think it is a disappointment for India that both Russia and China are not here, highlighting the India-US Saudi Arabia-India infrastructure corridor, which now includes the European Union. Mr. Campbell said that talks were still on with all the parties present in Delhi, and this would be a major breakthrough that would help fundamental delays with respect to infrastructure and communications from India with the Middle East and then on to Europe. The officials also faced several questions from the US White House press corps members on the lack of access for journalists in the press poll to the bilateral meetings and the main G20 venue. Mr. Campbell said that this had been raised with India and stressed that despite India's objection, the US had held a press interaction with Prime Minister Modi and President Biden during the June state visit in Washington. I do want to just underscore for you that in every meeting that I have been in, the President is very clear about the importance of the health of democracy. He does not do this in such a way that suggests that one country is lecturing to another, but rather that we all face shared challenges, and we think it's important that we are constantly asking the hard questions about our democracies. When pressed on whether concerns over India have led to any change in the Modi government, Rear Admiral Lin Laubacher, the NSC Senior Director for South Asia, pointing to the recent Karnataka election, said Mr. Modi had congratulated the Congress on the results, though she said the US would not like to ascribe this to its influence. Then NMDC coordinates efforts to ensure smooth flow of G20. The Council is taking proactive measures to ensure the efficient delivery of civic services and seamless coordination with various agencies. There are several logistical details and efforts behind the scene of an event as massive as the G20 summit currently ongoing in Delhi. Officials from various departments in the national capital have come together at the Disaster Management Center of New Delhi Municipal Corporation (NDMC) to ensure a seamless flow of operation across the 3 days. NDMC Vice Chairman Satish Upadhyay explained that the Disaster Management Center is providing real-time and critical support across areas of G20 importance. Officials from the Delhi Government, Lieutenant Governor's Office, PWD, MCD, BSES, DTC, Delhi Police, DTC, IGL, DJB, and DDMA are present at the center to coordinate and streamline any complaint that may arise. We have received approximately 20 complaints so far and have had the resolution rate of 100%. All these complaints were received internally. We have deployed over 3,000 ground workers and 440 cameras on location of importance to monitor any issues. An NDMC official said, Mr. Upadhyay said, staffers from all levels are engaged in this work. We received 20 complaints, which included 7 or 8 displaced billboards. A technical issue was found with a freshly installed fountain, a few non-functional light poles, and others. All of these were resolved within a few hours. A senior NDMC official who was on night duty said, all officials are highly dedicated and cannot relinquish our duties. This is an important event for the country, and the image we put out matters. For internal phone number have been issued to file complaints. Additionally, the NDMC is putting in additional efforts during security halt to ensure no foreign delegates are disturbed. Then in G20 nations to focus on global food security, the leaders' declaration adopted at the G20 meeting here on Saturday laid emphasis on ensuring global food and nutritional security for all in line with G20 Deccan High Level Principle on Food Security and Nutrition 2023. The leaders said in the declaration that they will encourage efforts to strengthen research cooperation in climate resilient and nutritious grains such as millet, quinoa, sorghum, and other traditional crops including rice, wheat, and maize. Use of fertilizer welcoming the outcomes from the G20 members' engagement in the 12th G20 meeting of agriculture chief scientists MSCs. They emphasized the importance of increasing access to availability and efficient use of fertilizer and agricultural inputs, including through strengthening local fertilizer production and to improve soil health. The leaders committed to accelerating innovation and investment focused on increasing agricultural productivity and reducing food loss and waste across the value chain and improving marketing and storage to build more sustainable and climate resilient agriculture and food system. commit to support developing countries' efforts capacities to address their food security challenges and work together to enable access to affordable, safe, nutritious, and healthy diets and to foster the progressive realization of the right to adequate food. The declaration said it added that G20 will also facilitate open, fair, predictable, and rule-based agriculture, food and fertilizer trade, not impose export prohibitions or restrictions and reduce market distortion in accordance with relevant WTO rules. Strengthening AMIS. The leaders said they are committed to strengthen the agricultural market information system and the group on earth observation global agricultural monitoring for greater transparency to avoid food price volatility, supporting AMIS work on fertilizer it expansion to include vegetable oils and for enhancing collaboration with early warning system. Then India and the UK agree to continue the work at pace. Reviewing progress on India-UK free trade agreement in the works, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his British counterpart Rishi Sunak agreed that ministers and negotiating teams would continue to work at pace towards an agreement. In a meeting with his Italian counterpart Giorgia Meloni, Mr. Modi appreciated Italy's support for India's G20 presidency as well as Italy joining the Global Biofuel Alliance and the India Middle East Europe Economic Corridor. We discussed ways to deepen trade linkage and boost investment. India and the UK will keep working for a prosperous and sustainable planet, Mr. Modi said on the social media platform X after a bilateral meeting with Mr. Sunak on the sidelines of the ongoing G20 summit. Mr. Modi also conveyed his applications for the UK's support during India's G20 presidency, marked by high-level participation at the various G20 meetings and events. Two nations, one ambition, an ambition rooted in our shared values, the connection between our people and of focus. Of course, our passion for cricket, Mr. Sunak said in turn. Both leaders also reviewed the progress of free trade agreement negotiations and expressed hope that the remaining issues could be addressed at the earliest so that a balanced, mutually beneficial, and forward looking free trade agreement is concluded. Soon, an official statement after the talks said on the FTA. The UK Prime Minister's office said in a statement that Mr. Sunak reiterated the UK's ambition to deliver a landmark trade deal which benefits business and workers in both countries and grows our trade in both goods and services. The statement also said that Mr. Sunak congratulated Mr. Modi on India's consummate presidency, the presidency of the G20 this year, which has demonstrated India's vital global leadership and influence. The leaders reflected on the close and growing ties between the UK and India, exemplified in the living bridge between our people. They also discussed a number of consular issues. It added the next day, India proposes G20 satellite for climate observation. India on Saturday proposed a launch to a G20 satellite mission for environment and climate observation with an aim to help the countries of the global south. Prime Minister Narendra Modi made the suggestion at the G20 Leaders Summit in the presence of world leaders including US President Joe Biden, UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and South Africa President Cyril Ramaphosa and others. Mr. Modi said the G20 satellite mission would be beneficial for all of humanity just as the data obtained from India's successful Chandrayaan mission. He said India is proposing the launch of G20 satellite mission for environment and climate observation with the same spirit. India invites the all G20 countries to join this initiative, Mr. Modi said during a session at G20 Leader Summit. 67 species of reptiles, 59 amphibians recorded in Wayanad Forest Survey. As many as 67 species of reptiles and 59 species of amphibians were identified in the first Herpetopuna survey that concluded recently in South Wayanad Forest Division in Kerala. Of these, four amphibians and three reptiles were spotted for the first time in the forest division. Of the 126 species identified, 48 amphibians and 21 reptiles. Reptiles are endemic to the Western Ghats. More than 100 volunteers from institutions across the state and nearly 70 frontline forest staff took part in the survey, which envisaged drafting new strategies to conserve small animals like amphibians and reptiles. Sandeep Das, National Postdoctoral Fellow, Department of Zoology, University of Calicut, K.P. Rajkumar, Wildlife Biologist, Sola National Park, and Nitin Dibakar, Research Scholar, Kerala Forest Research Institute, Pichi, led the survey. Key discoveries: the important amphibian species recorded during the survey include starry night frog bearing a constellation of blue dots on its obsidian body, miniature night frog, the tiniest frog in the front, and endangered species such as Malabar torrent toad and red stream toad. The naked dancing frog, previously associated only with areas in the Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuary, was also cited during the survey. The survey commenced with the recording of the green tree frog and culminated with a compendium of 59 amphibians, of which over 80% are uniquely found in the Western Ghats. Of the 67 reptile species cited, 21 are unique to the Western Ghats, Dr. Das said. Species like the Wayanad Dravido gecko, Nilgiri spiny lizard, and the Nilgiri forest lizard added depth to the survey's significance. The presence of a shield-tail snake, predominantly from Wayanad, brought forth the region's crucial role in global conservation discussion, Dr. Rajkumar said. Protect treasure troops. Dr. Das said stressed the need for studies on these amphibians and reptilian species which are mostly neglected. He advocated a broader outreach addressing myths and fears to ensure that these ecological treasure troves are protected. Mr. Divakar lauded the South Wayanad Forest Division for its biodiversity, which surpassed even well-known sanctuaries due to its diverse habitats. The five-day program was organized jointly by the Forest Department, South Wayanad Forest Development Agency, and Aranyakam Nature Foundation. Wildlife photographer Dhritiman Mukherjee handled a session on nature photography. Then what happened to Vikram lander to soft land on the moon? In the Chandrayaan-2 mission in 2019, there were three errors that happened in succession, causing the lander to crash on the moon. It would have been a success if any of the three errors had not be happened. In July 22, 2019, India successfully launched Chandrayaan 2. The second mission to the moon 22 days later, August 14, after a series of orbit raising maneuvers, the spacecraft finally escaped the Earth's gravity and followed a path towards the moon. 6 days later, Chandrayaan 2 was successfully inserted in our into lunar orbit. Finally, on September 2, the Vikram lander separated from the orbiter, performed two deorbit maneuvers, and on September 6 began its descent to the moon's surface. The descent went as planned up to an altitude of 2.1 km from the moon's surface before communication from the lander to the ground station was lost. The Vikram lander has apparently crash landed on the moon. Soon, a national-level failure analysis committee headed by Dr. V. Narayanan, director of the Liquid Propulsion System Center, was formed with experts drawn from National Institute and ISRO to study the cause of failure and to propose necessary corrections. The committee pinpointed three crucial mistakes that had happened in succession, resulting in the crash. Three are four Four important phases before the touchdown on the moon: the rough braking phase, the attitude hold orientation phase, the fine braking phase, and the landing phase. During the rough braking phase, the velocity of the lander was successfully reduced to a maximum. The problem was with the touchdown began when the Vikram lander entered the second phase at the attitude hold orientation phase. During this phase, the thrust had to be maintained up at half the level, but when the engines were commanded to provide half the thrust, the achieved thrust was more than half. The dispersion level was more than what we had assumed during the pre-flight simulations, explains Dr. K. Shivam, from former chairman of ISRO, under whose watch the Chandrayaan-2 was launched in 2019. The guidance system was supposed to have halved the thrust, but it malfunctioned. The guidance system was not designed to handle large dispersion, and this resulted in the guidance system malfunctioning, leading to full thrust being given to the lander, says Dr. Sibon. At the end of the attitude hold phase, the attitude and velocity were very different from the expected values. The guidance system malfunctioning was the second crucial error. According to Dr. Shivam, during the fine braking phase, the system was trying to correct the larger errors. The large-scale corrections to velocity and attitude demanded large orientation maneuvers. Charges to orientation are carried out by the control system, but unfortunately, the control system was not designed to produce large changes, even though there was a large demand for orientation change. The control system restricted the rate. As a result, the control system was unable to provide the necessary large correction to orientation. Dr. Sivan says the control system was taking more time to correct the orientation due to rate restriction, but by the time the lander had reached the moon's surface, this resulted in the lander crashing on the moon. The crash was caused by three mistakes. The thrust dispersion level was more than assumed for design. The flaw in the guidance system resulted in more thrust being given, and the rate restriction in control system failed to make large-scale changes in the orientation. The Chandrayaan-2 mission would have been a success if any of the three errors was not there. The three cumulative errors led to the failure, he says. Taking the learnings from Chandrayaan-2 failure, ISRO corrected for all the three major mistakes in the latest missions. The system was corrected to ensure extra dispersion does not happen. The guidance system was corrected and the restriction in the control system was removed. In addition, other improvements suggested by the failure analysis committee were also incorporated in Chandrayaan-3 mission. Extra fuel sensors and stronger lander legs designed for higher landing velocity led to a net increase in the weight about 250 kg of the lander. Since Chandrayaan-3 was not carrying one orbiter like its predecessor, it became possible to accommodate the increased weight of the lander meant that a single engine was not sufficient, so central engine was removed and two engines were used for landing. Dr. Siban says the central engine was added in the earlier mission as it was suspected that dust stirred by other engines would after the electronic components, but our analysis found that dust was not a problem. So next, did Vedanta lobby to dilute green corps? What does the Organized Crime and Corporation Reporting Project claim? Why is it important? In early 2022, the Union Environment Ministry relaxed the regulation to allow mining companies to increase production by up to 50% without needing to hold public hearings, which was a key requirement for the environmental clearance process, according to a report by Organized Crime and Cooperation Reporting Project (OCCRP). The move followed extensive lobbying by the Vedanta Group in 2021 when the world and India was in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic. एक second. Which restrictions were removed? The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change issued regulation to allow mining companies to increase production by up to 50% without needing to hold public hearings, public consultation, and where local people raised their concerns about how an expansion would impact their lives and livelihood. Many in the industry considered this the most onerous requirement of the clearance process. The Environment Ministry also published an amendment to the country's environmental impact assessment law in the early 2028 exempted oil and gas exploration project from having to hold public hearings. The change also downgraded the risk rating of these projects, meaning they only had to be given the green light by state authorities rather than by experts in the Environment Ministry. The recent amendments to the Forest Conservation Law to ensure that explorers will get prompt access to thousands of square kilometer of deemed forest areas of seismic surveys by obviating the need for time-consuming permits. Why were the corps lifted? The OCCRP reports claim that the restrictions were removed following the lobbying by mining giant Vedanta Group, whose chairperson Anil Agrawal is in a letter to then Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar in January 2021 said the government could add impetus to India's rapid economic recovery by allowing mining companies to boost production by up to 50% without having to secure new environmental clearance. The mining industry had already spent years before the pandemic trying to scarp regulations that required new environmental approvals when companies increased production. Losing environmental regulation for miners was not the company's only successful lobbying campaign. One of the company's subsidiaries, Cairn Oil and Gas, also started lobbying to scare public hearings for oil exploration project. As with mining, the government quietly amended the law with no public consultations. Since then, at least six of the Cran oil projects in the northern desert of the Rajasthan have been approved for development. What are the environmental experts saying? Environmental experts claim the government approved the changes without public consultation. The Environment Ministry changed the mining regulation by publishing an office memo meant to be used in for inter-office communications on its website by modifying important regulation using instruments like office memos without any public debate. The government may have strict the law according to a study of pandemic era regulatory changes by the Bidhi Center for Legal Policy. Why is Vedanta's lobbying being questioned, though the head of the major industry lobby group and India's mining secretary also praised for the rules to be loosened. Internal documents and government sources suggest Vedanta's lobbying was a key. The report says OCCRP found evidence that Vedanta has been an important donor to Bharatiya Janata Party. Two entities linked to a Vedanta subsidiary gave 43.5 crore rupees to the party between 2016 and 2020, according to the contribution report filed with the Election Commission by the BJP and the one of the entities. The donations from just one of these trusts, Bhadram Janhit Salika, put it in the top 10 donors to the BJP between the fiscal years 2016-2017 and 2021-22. According to data compiled by the Association for Democratic Reform, the amount could be more because Vedanta has also made political donation through electoral bond. What about India's goals on climate change? India is the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and its ability to regulate its heavy industries is crucial to the global efforts to combat climate change. The EIA is an important part of a mitigation hierarchy, a tool used to limit the amount of damage and action such as development of a new mine will have on the environment. Then next what should be done with electronic waste? ये last article है. Does India need a policy push to encourage manufacturers to reuse old component? What is the government stand on salvaging precious metal to reusing old phones that can be repaired easily? Why are consumers not handling in device which they do not use? The Indian Cellular and Electronic Association (ICEA) on August 28 released a report on pathways to circular economy in Indian electronics sector following a government effort with Niti Aayog to explore opportunities to harness e-waste. The report talks about changing the outlook on e-waste management to build a system where discarded electronic can electronics can have a new life either by themselves or by reintroducing components and precious metals into new hardware. There could be an additional $7 billion market opportunity in harnessing e-waste, the report said. Does India have e-waste management? E-waste management is largely informal in India, and as in the case of recycling, roughly 90% of the collection and 70% of the recycling are managed by a very competitive informal sector. The ICEA report says the informal sector is good at salvaging other device for parts of profiting from repairs with them. Then there are almost industrial hubs like Moradabad where printed circuit boards arrive in the tons to have gold and silver melted out of them and sold. The Union government notified the e-waste management rules 2022 last November in order to digitize the process and provide more visibility to the movement of e-waste in the economy. The level of e-waste may grow too as phones get cheaper and people use them more on the back of cheaper data plans. There has been a significant increase in the people damaging their phones as opposed to the device simply getting too would to keep working. Kunal Mahipal, the founder of the of Repair Farm on site Go, said the informal sector realized on a number of tools and techniques to stay competitive. For instance, the reporter's author speaks of cannibalization, a euphemism for repair shops buying whole devices and breaking them down to serve as spare parts for repair as tariffs for finished products are sometimes lower than they are for parts. This works out in the repair shops favor. Why is a circular economy important? Demand for electronics is growing across all price segments, even as the production of these devices entails the use of scarce and elements and high emissions. Instead of merely salvaging these parts, a circular economy seeks to bring them into the electronic ecosystem. Every material as it's produced on Earth is a resource and not waste. Alkesh Kumar Sharma, until recently the Union IT Secretary, said during the ICA reports launch its wealth we have to create more wealth. Sandeep Chatterjee, a senior director at IT Ministry, who has focused on US related issues, said that there needed to be a policy push to encourage manufacturers to reuse old components. By 2019, China ensured that 5% of their secondary raw material went into manufacturing of new products. Dr. Chatterjee said by 2030 they are targeting 35%. How can e-waste be recycled? The ICEA report suggests public-private partnership to distribute the cross cost of setting up partnership to distribute the cost of setting up a sprawling reverse supply chain, an expensive prospect that envisages collecting devices from users, wiping them clean of personal data, and passing them along for further processing and recycling. It also suggests launching an auditable database of material collected through this process and creating geographical cluster where these devices come together and are broken apart. A key recommendation is to incentivize so-called high-yield recycling centers. Facilities that recycle are generally not equipped to extract the full potential value of the products they handle. For instance, extracting minutes but precious amounts of rare earth metals in semiconductor. The IT Ministry launched a scheme last year, April, to cover 25% of the capital expenditure on such facilities, simply encouraging repair and making products last longer. Perhaps by supporting a right to repair by users is also a policy recommendation that may reduce the environmental burden of electronic waste. What are the challenges beyond the large and informal sector that is hard to track or hold to environmental norms? There are basic challenges. For instance, a whopping 200 million devices are estimated to be lying at consumers' homes who do not hand them in for recycling after they stop using them. Sandeep Singh, an Accenture executive who worked on the ICA report, said that many people are concerned about what may happen to the personal data on their devices if they hand them in for recycling. Building recycling plants on a large scale also requires more than the initial capital cost. Material is a real challenge for our economic growth. Dr. Chatterjee pointed out where is the material too big. Firms came to us instead of interested in sorry interested in investing in recycling plants, but they do not have material. They are not asking for an important import license. They just want their plants stabilized, and the materials to stabilize these plants are scattered, he said. Making a circular economy out of e-waste is tempting, especially given the unpredictable supply chains for electronic components. Extracting the full value of electronics is capital intensive and will require better clustering of material and viable business model. The challenge is to be able to replicate the success of the informal sector in a formalized and reliable way, but a shrinking availability of a virgin component may not be a prospect that can be ignored for too long. Mr. Mohipal said it is only a matter of time before the country has to focus on how to give a second life or not just to products but also to parts, he warned. So this is all for today, and we will meet from tomorrow onwards with new daily news analysis. So thank you all.